The scorching heat of the afternoon sun bore down on the vast, arid land surrounding Star Ridge Ranch, one of the most prominent properties in Texas. From the balcony of his main office, Caspian Garza surveyed his empire with the cold, calculating gaze that defined him. The ranch was a reflection of his personality, efficient, rigid, and intolerant of errors or weaknesses. Every horse that stepped onto his land was an investment, a carefully managed project meant to generate both profit and prestige. Failure was not an option, and Sable had failed. Once a source of pride, the mare had suffered a devastating accident weeks ago. During a jumping exercise, her front legs failed to clear an obstacle, causing a catastrophic fall. The veterinarian's verdict was final. Her left leg was irreparably damaged, ruling out any chance of future competition. What made matters worse was her condition. Sable was pregnant. To Caspian, this was a burden he refused to bear. The news reached him during a modest lunch shared with his closest staff. As the vet delivered the report, Caspian's face remained unreadable, but his decision was swift. "There's no room here for useless horses," he said, setting his fork down on the plate with a sharp clink. Turning to his foreman, he added curtly, "Take her away. She's not coming back." The staff, familiar with his ruthless nature, exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared challenge him. Benedict, the sturdy foreman with calloused hands, hesitated before proposing an alternative. "Mr. Caspian, maybe we could at least—" "At least what, Benedict?" Caspian's voice sliced through the room like a whip. "She's a fine mare." "Maybe once." Caspian cut him off, his voice rising with a fury that echoed through the dining hall, silencing even the kitchen staff in the next room. "But there are no maybes here. If she isn't profitable, she's worthless." His tone dropped, cold and cutting. "We don't waste resources on this ranch." Unaware of the conversation sealing her fate, Sable stood confined in a small corral at the edge of the ranch. Her once glossy coat, which had shimmered in the sunlight like polished ebony, was now dull and caked with dust. Her injured leg forced her into a painful limp, while her swollen belly betrayed the life growing inside her. Though her sight was nearly gone, her ears twitched constantly, straining to catch sounds of reassurance in her lonely enclosure. When the time came, the old transport truck was brought around. Benedict, along with a young ranch hand named Elior, approached Sable with ropes and soft murmurs. "Easy, girl," Benedict said, his rough hands gently stroking her neck. Though he despised carrying out such orders, he knew he had no choice. With effort, they managed to load Sable into the truck. She let out a faint whinny as the vehicle jolted into motion, a feeble protest against what she instinctively knew was her end. Benedict avoided meeting the animal's eyes as he climbed into the driver's seat. "Let's go, Elior," he muttered to the silent young man, who climbed in without a word. The drive out to the desert was long and somber. Benedict gripped the wheel tightly, his mind racing with memories of when Sable had been the pride of the ranch. Caspian used to parade her in front of buyers, boasting of her strength and elegance. But those days were gone, and Benedict had a job to do. They finally arrived at a barren stretch of land surrounded by cacti and dry brush. The sun hung mercilessly at its peak, the oppressive heat making the air shimmer. Benedict brought the truck to a halt and stepped out, followed by Elior. Together, they moved to the back to release Sable. The mare stood still, her once vibrant spirit now subdued, as Benedict worked to untie her ropes. "It's here, girl." His voice was barely audible, as though he were speaking to himself. Sable tried to take a step forward, but her injured leg buckled beneath her weight. The swelling in her side made her stagger, and her cloudy eyes searched the emptiness as if looking for something she could no longer find. Elior, who had been silent until now, spoke in a trembling voice. "Can't we keep her?" "And what would we do with her, Elior?" Benedict replied, his tone a mix of harshness and reluctant sympathy. Elior didn't argue. He knew it was pointless. They left the mare under the sparse shade of a mesquite tree and climbed back into the truck, driving off and leaving a trail of dust behind them. Sable stood still for a moment, her ears twitching as if trying to process the overwhelming silence. Then, with immense effort, she took one step, then another, moving slowly across the unforgiving terrain. The sun sank lower in the horizon, painting the desert in hues of orange and gold as Sable, exhausted, collapsed next to a cluster of rocks. Her breaths came in ragged heaves, and her faint whinnies were swallowed by the wind. Alone, abandoned in a world seemingly determined to extinguish her, a small ember of life still burned within her, fragile but defiant. What Elior and Benedict could not foresee was that this was not the end of Sable's journey. In that barren wasteland, a new story was beginning, one that would change not only her fate, but also the lives of those who would cross her path. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, the dusty air glimmered in twilight. Just outside the small, weathered town of San Ignacio, 17-year-old Leona darted barefoot along a trail strewn with sharp rocks and brittle roots. Her youth belied the heavy burden she carried. Since her father's passing, she had become the sole provider for her ailing mother and two younger siblings, Gideon and Willa. San Ignacio was a modest, struggling community, its adobe homes barely withstanding the seasonal rains. The villagers shared a quiet resilience, bound together by scarcity. Leona and her family lived in a simple house on the town's edge, surrounded by scrub brush and towering cacti. Each day she worked tirelessly with her small but capable hands, gathering firewood to cook or sell at the local market. That evening, like so many others, she ventured deeper into the desert, her eyes scanning the ground for dry branches before darkness swallowed the landscape. But something unusual broke the stillness, a faint, muffled sound, almost a whimper. She froze, her brow furrowing as she turned toward the noise. A horse. Out here? It didn't make sense. Horses didn't last long in this harsh, barren land. Curiosity mixed with unease as she pressed forward, pushing aside thorny shrubs that scratched her arms. Each step brought her closer to the source of the sound until she stumbled upon a sight that left her breathless. There, shrouded in the shadows of tangled bushes, was a mare. She was trembling, her legs barely holding her up, her entire frame an image of raw suffering. Leona approached slowly, murmuring soothing words despite her pounding heart. "Easy now, sweet girl. I won't hurt you," she whispered. As she drew near, the truth hit her like a jolt of icy water. The mare's eyes were dull, nearly blind. Her coat was matted with dust and streaked with shallow cuts. Her left side was swollen, and every movement seemed to carry unbearable pain. Then Leona noticed the telltale bulge in the mare's belly. She was pregnant. Leona felt her throat tighten. She had never witnessed so much pain concentrated in a single being. Kneeling before the mare, she reached out a trembling hand to her muzzle. Sable, teetering on the edge of surrender, sniffed weakly at the gesture before lowering her head to the ground with a heavy sigh. "Oh, dear God," Leona whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. Leona stood still for a moment, caught in an internal struggle about what to do next. She couldn't ignore the mare, but she also couldn't deny the stark reality of her situation. Her family barely had enough to feed 3 human mouths. Adding an injured pregnant animal to their responsibilities felt like an impossible burden. Yet, something deep inside her refused to leave the mare behind. She recalled her father's words, a man who had loved animals deeply and often told her that the weakest creatures needed human kindness the most. Following a decision led more by her heart than logic, she gently tugged the rope tied around the mare's neck. "Come on, girl. I'm not going to leave you here." Sable barely responded, too weak to stand. Frustrated but determined, Leona looked around for help. But the desert stretched out empty, as if the world had shrunk to just her and the mare. Gritting her teeth, she made a desperate effort to push and coax Sable to rise. Her words became a soft plea, broken by exhaustion. "Please, don't give up, you've got to try." After several attempts, Sable, inspired by the will of the young stranger, managed to stumble to her feet. Her breathing was labored, but her legs held enough strength to take one step, then another. Leona stayed close, gripping the rope with one hand while stroking the mare's neck with the other. "That's it. You're doing great. Just a little more." The journey back to San Ignacio was grueling and slow. Every few feet, Sable would stop, forcing Leona to kneel beside her, speaking in soft tones to keep her from giving up. By the time they reached the edge of the village, the sun had dipped below the horizon, and the first stars glimmered in the night sky. Gideon and Willa, waiting by the fire pit outside their small home, ran toward her as she appeared. "Leona? What is that?" Gideon asked, his wide eyes fixed on the mare. "She's a mare," Leona panted, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "I found her in the desert. I couldn't leave her behind. But how are we going to feed her?" Willa, only 8 but already wise to their family's hardships, asked with a note of concern. Leona met their gazes, her expression firm and resolute. "We'll figure it out. I won't abandon her." Sable, having spent every ounce of strength she had, collapsed onto the dirt in front of their little home, letting out a low, pained groan that echoed in the stillness. Leona knelt beside her, gently stroking her head and whispering, "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." That night, the siblings shared the last of their bread and beans, while Sable lay motionless under a makeshift shelter they had hurriedly constructed for her. Leona knew this was only the beginning of their struggle, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the wounded mare had come into their lives for a reason. The first rays of dawn crept through the cracked windows of their humble adobe home, illuminating the signs of a life defined by sacrifice. The walls, though cracked, stood strong, and the packed dirt floor was swept clean. Their few pieces of furniture were old but carefully maintained. That morning, however, the usual quiet was interrupted by a soft neigh coming from the makeshift shelter in the backyard. Leona was already awake. She always rose before her siblings. Despite the weariness weighing on her, her steps felt light as she approached the shelter. There lay Sable, resting on a bed of straw that she and Gideon had gathered the night before. The mare's breathing was shallow, but her ears twitched faintly at the sound of Leona's approach. Leona knelt beside her, her hand brushing gently against the mare's muzzle. "Good morning, beautiful," she whispered. "We made it through another day." The wound on Sable's leg looked worse under the morning light. Leona's heart sank as she realized the infection could spread without proper care. But there was no money for a veterinarian, not even for basic remedies. Taking a deep breath, Leona stood tall, her resolve firm, as she decided to make the most of what little they had. Behind her, 12-year-old Gideon, already burdened with responsibilities far beyond his years, stepped forward with a somber expression. "Leona, the well's running dry. We'll need to head to the creek today," he said. "All right," she replied, her eyes fixed on the injured mare, Sable. "After that, I need you to gather more hay. What we have won't last." Gideon nodded without complaint, even though the weight of duties, meant for an adult, hung heavily on his young shoulders. Meanwhile, Willa lingered by the doorway, clutching a worn rag doll in her small hands. Despite her age, her wide, dark eyes mirrored the worry that clouded her heart. "Is she going to die?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Leona turned to her, kneeling so their eyes met. "No, Willa. We won't let that happen." Determination blazed in her voice, even as reality loomed unkindly over them. Throughout the day, Leona and her siblings worked tirelessly to tend to Sable. They cleaned the mare's wound with fresh water from the creek and prepared a makeshift salve with herbs Leona vaguely remembered her mother using in better days. Though crude, she applied the mixture with gentle care, whispering soothing words to the animal. "I know it hurts, but I promise you'll feel better soon." The days that followed tested their endurance. The family had barely enough food for themselves, yet they shared whatever they could spare with Sable. In her innocent generosity, Willa saved crumbs from her cornbread to secretly feed the mare. Gideon hauled heavy buckets of water from the creek to keep her hydrated. At night, after her siblings had fallen asleep, Leona sat by Sable's side under the flicker of a candle, often speaking to her as if the horse could understand. "Sometimes, I think we're the same, you and I. Left behind, as if we didn't matter. But I won't give up, and you shouldn't either." Slowly, their care began to show results. Sable, though still frail and limping, began to stand more often. Her soft whinnies became more frequent, and her once dull eyes regained a faint glimmer. Leona noticed every small improvement, each one feeling like a triumph against the cruel fate that seemed to have marked them. One afternoon, as she applied the salve to Sable's leg, Willa came running from the house with a wildflower in hand. "Leona, I found this by the creek," she exclaimed. Leona took the flower, studying it before tucking it behind Sable's ear. "It's perfect for her. See, now she looks like the queen she is," she said with a smile, making Willa giggle. For a brief moment, the heavy weight of their struggles lifted. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. One night, Sable's restless whinnies shattered the stillness. Leona rushed to the shed to find the mare lying on the ground, struggling to breathe. Fear gripped her, but she forced herself to act. Waking Gideon, they worked together to calm Sable, whispering desperate pleas. "Don't give up on us, Sable. Please, just hold on a little longer," Leona murmured, her tears falling freely. Though the immediate crisis passed, the incident served as a stark reminder of how fragile the mare's life was. They couldn't afford to let their guard down. Weeks turned into a rhythm of care and survival, and the bond between Leona and Sable deepened. For Leona, tending to the mare became a source of solace, a fragile thread of hope in their harsh reality. Sable, as if sensing her dependency on the family, grew more cooperative, and even Gideon, initially reluctant, developed a soft spot for her. He spent more time ensuring her comfort, his quiet actions speaking volumes. One evening, as Leona watched Sable nibble on the sparse hay they'd managed to gather, she felt an unfamiliar flicker of hope. It wasn't much, just a faint sense that their struggle might have meaning. Though she couldn't explain why, she believed that Sable, the wounded mare who had brought them together in hardship, carried a purpose greater than they yet understood. The night settled peacefully over the small desert town, a cool breeze rustling through the dry brush and whispering across the sand. For the first time in what felt like forever, Leona allowed herself to dream of a better tomorrow. Leona's small house was steeped in a profound silence, broken only by the faint creaking of the wooden stove. But amidst the stillness, a sharp, almost desperate whinny erupted from the barn, startling Leona awake. Sitting up on her makeshift bed, her heart raced as she recognized Sable's voice. She sprang to her feet, lighting an old kerosene lamp that cast a dim glow across the room. Without pausing to slip on her shoes, she darted out to the barn, where she found Sable lying on her side, struggling for breath, her hind legs stiff and tense. "Gideon! Willa!" she called out urgently, her eyes fixed on the mare. Her two siblings arrived quickly, still groggy. "What's going on, Leona?" Gideon asked, his voice laced with concern. "It's the foal," Leona replied, her voice trembling. "It's coming, but I need your help." Gideon's eyes widened, and he dashed to fetch more lamps to brighten the space. Meanwhile, Willa lingered near Leona, torn between fear and curiosity, watching as her sister ran a trembling hand over Sable's side. "Easy now, girl. You can do this," Leona whispered, her voice steady despite the storm of nerves churning inside her. Time seemed to hang suspended as the family prepared for the pivotal moment. Leona replayed the sparse lessons their father had once shared about foaling. Though she had never witnessed a birth herself, she understood how critical the foal's position was. Carefully examining Sable, she felt her stomach tighten. The foal's legs weren't aligned properly. "It won't come out," Willa exclaimed, tears pooling in her eyes. "It will," Leona answered firmly, masking the panic rising within her. Driven by sheer determination, Leona acted. She used her hands to try and reposition the foal, speaking softly, both to calm herself and to reassure Sable. "Listen to me, sweetheart," she murmured. "I promised I wouldn't leave you. You and your baby are going to be just fine." The hours that followed were grueling. Sable cried out in pain, and each time it seemed the foal might make progress, it would slip back again. Gideon, who had been keeping to the shadows, finally stepped forward, kneeling beside his sister. "Tell me what to do. We can't lose her." Leona glanced at him with gratitude and directed him to steady Sable, ensuring she didn't move too much. Meanwhile, Willa, trembling but resolute, fetched clean water and cloths to help. The young girl bit her lip to keep from crying, though the fear of losing the mare gnawed at her. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the foal began to emerge. First came its thin, damp legs, followed by a small but sturdy body. As the foal finally slipped free, Leona cradled it in her arms, oblivious to the cold or her own exhaustion. It was a chestnut colt, its coat gleaming faintly, as though kissed by the desert dust itself. Despite its harrowing arrival, the foal wriggled with surprising vigor, letting out a soft whinny that brought life and warmth to the barn. Leona couldn't hold back her tears. All the effort, the worry, it had all been worth it. "We did it," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Gideon and Willa moved closer, awestruck by the scene. Sable, though drained, lifted her head slightly, her muzzle reaching out to the foal in a tender gesture of recognition. The bond between mother and child was immediate and undeniable. "What are we going to name him?" Willa asked, her eyes sparkling with a light they hadn't held in a long time. Leona thought for a moment, her mind drifting to the rare but powerful thunderstorms that rolled across the desert. "Bolt," she said finally. "That will be his name." Gideon nodded in agreement, and Willa beamed as she gently stroked the colt's back. Bolt was a marvel, a symbol of resilience, almost otherworldly in his strength and presence. It was as if all the struggles Sable had endured during her pregnancy had been transformed into an extraordinary vitality for her newborn. That night, no one in the family slept. The three siblings stayed close to Sable and Bolt, watching over them, ensuring both were safe. As the first rays of dawn pierced the horizon, Leona felt something she hadn't in years. Pure, unfiltered hope. Sable had displayed an unyielding strength, and Bolt was living proof that even in the harshest circumstances, something beautiful and extraordinary could emerge. For Leona, the foal wasn't just a new life. It was a reminder that with love and perseverance, even the most fragile things could grow into something strong and majestic. As the desert sun began to rise, painting the landscape with a golden glow, a new day dawned in the quiet town of San Ignacio. Inside a makeshift shelter, Bolt took his first unsteady steps. His legs trembled with the uncertainty of a newborn, yet there was an undeniable spark in him, bold and almost defiant. Sable, though weakened from giving birth, never took her eyes off her baby, watching him with a mix of tenderness and pride. Standing nearby, Leona observed the young foal closely. She couldn't help but marvel at Bolt's spirit, just hours old, and already displaying a vigor that seemed to challenge the odds of his difficult birth. Gently stroking his neck, she couldn't help but remember the long, grueling days they'd endured to keep Sable alive. Every ounce of effort, every sleepless night now felt justified. "Do you think he'll be strong?" Willa asked, her voice filled with wonder as she watched the foal from the doorway of the shelter. Without shifting her gaze, Leona replied with quiet confidence. "I don't think so, Willa. I know he will. This little one has something special." Gideon appeared, his hands covered in dirt from working on a larger corral with whatever materials he could scavenge. Wiping his hands on his jeans, he approached with his usual calm. "The corral will be ready by this afternoon," he announced in his steady, deep voice. "Bolt's going to need space to run." Leona offered a grateful smile. Gideon wasn't one for many words, but his dedication was clear in everything he did. Though the three siblings were young, they understood the weight of their new responsibility. It would demand their time, effort, and sacrifices. In the weeks that followed, Bolt grew stronger by the day. His small frame began to show firm muscles, and his long legs hinted at a speed that promised greatness. Sable, meanwhile, regained some of her strength despite her lingering injury, though her movements remained slow. Leona poured her energy into caring for both of them, seamlessly balancing her daily chores with the constant demands of the animals. One quiet afternoon, watching Bolt gallop across the freshly built corral, Leona thought of her father. He had never raised competition horses, but his love for animals was profound. He often told her that the key to training a horse wasn't strength or breed, but the bond between the animal and its handler. Inspired by his words, Leona decided to start training Bolt. She might not have the resources or the expertise of a professional, but she trusted her instincts and her unwavering dedication. "Come on, little one," she called one morning, stepping into the corral with a makeshift rope in hand. "Time to get to work." Bolt watched her curiously, tilting his head as though trying to decipher her intentions. Leona chuckled softly, approaching him with calm, steady steps. "Don't worry. It won't be hard. Just trust me, okay?" The early training sessions were challenging. Bolt's boundless energy often got the better of him, leading to moments of disobedience. But Leona was relentless, her patience unyielding. Over and over, she repeated the exercises, guiding him to follow her commands and respond to her gestures. From the shade of a nearby tree, Gideon and Willa often watched, captivated by the growing bond between their sister and the spirited foal. "Do you think Bolt could run like the horses Dad used to talk about?" Willa asked one afternoon, her gaze fixed on the foal as he galloped with surprising speed. Gideon's lips curved into a small smile, a flicker of pride in his voice. I think he might run even faster. The day Leona decided to test Bolt's speed was one of the most exhilarating moments since his birth. The siblings had set up a makeshift track in an open field near their home, marking a path with stones and branches. Holding the rope firmly, Leona led Bolt to the starting point. "All right, boy," she said, her voice filled with anticipation. "Let's see what you've got." As she released the rope, Bolt bolted forward like an arrow shot from a bow. His legs moved with a breathtaking combination of strength and agility, leaving Leona stunned. The rhythmic pounding of his hooves against the earth echoed like a drumbeat, resonating through the vast sun-drenched expanse of the desert. "It's incredible!" Willa exclaimed, clapping her hands in excitement. Meanwhile, Gideon stood nearby with his arms crossed, his gaze sharp as he analyzed every move of the colt with a critical eye. "He's got talent," he finally said, "but he'll need much more training if we want him to be truly exceptional." Leona turned to him, her eyes wide with surprise. "Do you really think he has a chance to compete?" she asked, her voice wavering between hope and doubt. "I don't think so," Gideon replied with a faint smile. "I know he does." As the months rolled on, the colt, named Bolt, began to make a name for himself in the small, tight-knit community of Ignacio, New Mexico. Curious neighbors, lured by tales of an extraordinary horse, frequently stopped by Leona Family Ranch. Some offered unsolicited advice, others simply wanted to see the creature with their own eyes. A colt, born from an abandoned mare, now whispered to be something extraordinary. But to Leona, Bolt was more than a promising horse. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that even amid the harshest trials, life could push through the cracks and thrive. In the dusty streets of Ignacio, the name Bolt quickly became a common thread in every conversation. Neighbors who had watched Leona and her family endure hardships now spoke with admiration of the young horse that defied all expectations. The town's modest horse competitions, held on makeshift tracks and under the blistering heat, were essential events for the community. It was at one such tournament that Bolt first displayed his brilliance, drawing attention far beyond their small corner of New Mexico. On the day of the race, the air buzzed with anticipation. The people of Ignacio gathered around a rough wooden fence encircling a hastily arranged track. Local competitors meticulously prepared their horses, adjusting saddles and inspecting hooves. But all eyes turned when Leona arrived, guiding Bolt with nothing more than a simple rope halter. "Is that the famous colt?" a burly man with a tilted cowboy hat muttered, his skepticism evident. "They say he's as fast as the wind," replied another, though his tone hinted at disbelief. Leona ignored their comments, her focus unwavering, her gaze fixed on Bolt, who pawed the ground with restless energy, as though he understood the significance of the moment. Leaning close, she whispered into his ear, "Today, we'll show them what you're made of." When the starting gun fired, Bolt bolted like a shot, a whirlwind of dust marking his trail. The crowd stood stunned, their eyes wide with disbelief as the young colt displayed incredible speed and unyielding determination. Crossing the finish line first, Leona let out a victorious cry, her joy met with a thunderous round of applause and cheers from the spectators. News of Bolt's triumph spread like wildfire. It wasn't long before word reached Caspian Garza, who was overseeing a training session at his renowned La Estrella ranch. "What's this about?" Caspian asked as one of his ranch hands approached him, visibly eager. "There's a colt in Ignacio, sir. They say he's extraordinary, won a local race, outrunning more experienced horses." Caspian said nothing at first, his expression unreadable as he absorbed the information. Finally, he frowned and asked, "What's so special about him? His bloodline?" "No, sir," the man replied hesitantly. "The curious thing is, he's from a mare you dismissed, one you said wasn't worth keeping." A shadow flickered across Caspian's face. He was not a man accustomed to admitting mistakes, and the idea that an animal he deemed worthless was now garnering such attention irked him. Yet it also piqued his curiosity. "What's the colt's name?" he asked, his voice carefully measured. "Bolt," the ranch hand replied, "and he belongs to a young woman named Leona." A few days later, as Leona and her siblings were busy tending to the corral, a sleek black car appeared on the dusty road leading to their home. Willa, fetching water near the entrance, was the first to notice the vehicle. As the early morning sun bathed the quiet countryside in golden light, a sudden commotion broke the stillness. "Leona, someone's coming!" Willa shouted, darting toward the house. Leona quickly stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression calm but alert. From the edge of the driveway, Gideon appeared, his brows furrowed with suspicion. An expensive car came to a slow stop, its glossy surface gleaming in the sunlight. The passenger door opened, and a man, impeccably dressed in polished leather boots and a wide-brimmed hat, descended with an air of practiced ease. "Are you Leona?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. Leona regarded him warily, her arms crossing instinctively as she nodded. "I am. What can I do for you?" The man, Caspian, wasted no time. "I've heard you have an exceptional stallion. I'm here to buy it." A tense silence fell, thick and heavy like the humid summer air before a storm. Willa glanced nervously at her sister, while Gideon clenched his fists, sensing that trouble had found them. Leona, steady and composed, replied firmly, "I'm sorry, sir. Bolt isn't for sale." Caspian raised an eyebrow, clearly unaccustomed to resistance. "I can offer you a generous amount," he said smoothly, his tone implying wealth beyond their imagination. "Far more than you'd ever think possible." Leona stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "This isn't about money. Bolt isn't just a horse. He's family." Her unwavering gaze startled Caspian. For a moment his dark eyes locked with hers, and something in his demeanor faltered. He hadn't expected such defiance, especially from someone so young. "That's admirable," he finally said, his tone tinged with condescension. "But you're making a mistake." "The only mistake was yours," Leona countered, her voice steady, though the edge in it was unmistakable. "You didn't see the value in Sable, and now you're here trying to reclaim what you overlooked. But Bolt isn't for sale." Caspian's jaw tightened, his frustration evident, yet there was a flicker of respect in his gaze as he studied her. Without another word, he turned on his heel and climbed back into his car. But as the vehicle disappeared down the dirt road, Leona knew this wasn't over. His determined look as he drove away was a silent promise of his return. That evening, as Leona and her siblings sat around their small, time-worn dining table, the encounter with Caspian lingered in her thoughts. She couldn't shake the unease his visit had left behind. "No matter how much money he offers," she murmured, more to herself than to her siblings, "Bolt stays here. This is where he belongs." Gideon nodded in quiet agreement, while Willa gently stroked Bolt's mane, the stallion standing calmly outside the window. Bolt wasn't merely a prized animal, he was a testament to their shared struggles and triumphs. Yet none of them knew Caspian wasn't the type to take no for an answer. Over the following days, a quiet tension settled over their small ranch. Rumors began circulating in the nearby town of Ashwood, stories of strange men seen near their property, lingering by the pastures where Bolt grazed. Though no one approached directly, the unsettling presence made Leona wary. One morning, while gathering firewood with Willa on the edge of their land, Gideon came running toward them, his face tight with anger and worry. "Leona, they're back," he called out breathlessly. "That man, Caspian, he's brought more people." Leona's heart pounded in her chest. Dropping the bundle of firewood, she grabbed Willa's hand and rushed back to the house. What she saw there ignited a fire in her chest. Caspian stood by the corral, his suit pristine and his posture confident. Behind him, two men loomed with threatening stances. Bolt, sensing the danger, stomped the ground and whinnied restlessly, his glossy coat shimmering under the sun. "What are you doing here?" Leona demanded, her voice cutting through the tension like a whip. She marched toward him with purposeful steps, her fists clenched tightly at her sides. Caspian turned slowly, a calculating smile playing on his lips. "I came to make one final offer, Leona," he said smoothly. "This horse has untapped potential. Under the right care, he could become a legend. I'm willing to pay whatever you ask for him." Leona held her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. "I've already told you, Bolt isn't for sale. Why can't you accept that?" The smile on Caspian's face faltered, replaced by a hard-edged seriousness. "Because I know what I'm looking at. This horse is a treasure, but you don't have the means to give him the future he deserves. Think about your family, Leona. With the money I'm offering, you could give them a better life." The mention of her family struck a deep, sensitive chord in Leona. She knew all too well how precarious their living conditions were, yet she also understood that Bolt symbolized far more than financial security. Taking a deep breath, she steadied herself before responding, her voice firm but laced with raw emotion. "Bolt doesn't need luxury or fancy facilities. What he has is something you'll never be able to buy: love, trust, and freedom." Caspian's men remained calm, but the tension in their leader's clenched jaw betrayed his frustration. "You're a brave young woman, Leona," Caspian replied, his voice low and calculating, "but you're also naive. This world doesn't run on emotions. It's driven by results. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." Without waiting for her response, he turned on his heel and started toward his car. Before getting in, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "I hope you don't come to regret this decision." As his car disappeared into the distance, Leona felt her legs trembling beneath her. She leaned against the paddock fence, steadying herself as Gideon and Willa approached her, their faces etched with concern. "Do you think he'll come back?" Gideon asked, his brow furrowed. "I don't know," Leona replied, lowering her gaze to Bolt, who had trotted over to nuzzle her for comfort. Gently stroking his muzzle, she added, "But we won't let him take what's ours." That evening, as they sat down to a quiet dinner, the tension in the air was palpable. Leona couldn't shake the unease Caspian's persistence had stirred. A man like him wouldn't accept a refusal so easily. "What if he tries to steal him?" Willa asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Gideon glanced from his younger sister to Leona, waiting for her to speak. "I won't let that happen," Leona declared with steely resolve. "Bolt is part of this family, and no one is going to take him away from us." After dinner, they decided to take turns keeping watch through the night. While Gideon took the first shift, Leona made her way out to the paddock to sit with Bolt and Sable. The mare, who had regained much of her strength, lay beside her foal, as though her presence alone could shield him from any danger. Leona settled on the ground beside them, her fingers gliding through Bolt's soft coat as she gazed up at the stars. "You're strong, little one," she murmured, her voice tinged with a mix of pride and worry. "And I promise, I'll do everything in my power to protect you." Meanwhile, at the sprawling La Estrella ranch, Caspian sat in his lavish study, a glass of whiskey in hand and stacks of documents detailing his prized horses spread across the desk. Despite all his wealth and possessions, his mind was fixated on Bolt. There was something about that colt, something defiant, something he felt compelled to claim. "Boss, if you want, we can—" one of his men began, suggesting a more forceful approach. Caspian cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "No, I want to do this the right way, at least for now." Yet, deep down, he knew his patience had its limits. Bolt wasn't just a potential asset for his ranch. The colt represented a challenge to his ego, a prize he couldn't let slip away. At sunrise, Leona woke with a renewed sense of determination. Standing up to Caspian would be no easy feat, but she also knew she wasn't alone. Bolt, Sable, and her siblings were her strength, and together they could face any threat. What she didn't realize, however, was that fate was about to test her resolve in ways she couldn't have anticipated. The story of Leona and her standoff with Caspian quickly spread across their small town of San Ignacio. Neighbors who already admired her dedication to Bolt began to see her as a symbol of resilience and hope. This wasn't just about an extraordinary colt. It was a story of a humble family standing tall against overwhelming odds, transforming adversity into something inspiring. But their fragile sense of peace was disrupted one sweltering afternoon by the arrival of an unexpected letter. A man from the city, dressed in a clean but worn suit, appeared at their doorstep, a sealed envelope clutched in his hand. "Is that Leona?" the man asked, his tone formal as he regarded the young woman. "That's me. What do you need?" she replied, wiping the sweat from her brow after a long morning tending to the horses. The man extended an envelope toward her with a respectful nod. "This is for you. It comes from the organizers of the International Championship in Buenos Aires. Your name is listed among the participants representing this region." Leona blinked in astonishment, her thoughts racing. She hadn't heard a word about this championship, let alone her inclusion in it. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and began to read. As she scanned the contents, Gideon and Willa approached, their curiosity piqued. This championship wasn't just any event. It was one of the most prestigious competitions on the continent. The invitation meant that Bolt, her prized horse, had been recognized as an extraordinary contender. Excitement surged through her, but reality quickly tempered her enthusiasm. Traveling all the way to Argentina would be expensive, and her family could barely make ends meet in their modest San Ignacio. "What do we do now?" Gideon asked, his worry evident as he looked at his sister. Leona folded the letter and took a deep breath. "We try. If Bolt competes there, it could change everything for us." News of the championship spread through their small town, igniting a wave of community support. Neighbors rallied together, hosting raffles, selling food at the town square, and collecting donations. All their efforts were fueled by a shared hope of raising enough money for the journey. "Bolt isn't just a horse," said Martha, a revered elder whose corncakes were famous throughout the town. "He's our hope. If he can succeed, so can we." Every day, more people joined the cause. The men pitched in to repair and enhance Bolt's corral, ensuring he had the best environment for training. Women sewed blankets and decorative accessories to make Bolt shine at the championship. Even the children, who normally spent their afternoons playing tag or climbing trees, took to the streets selling candies, proud to contribute to Leona's dream. Despite everyone's tireless efforts, the funds still fell short. 10 days before their departure, Leona sat alone in the courtyard under the night sky, tears streaming silently down her face. She had come so far, but the dream felt achingly out of reach. Stroking Bolt's mane, she whispered, "I don't know what else to do." 2 days later, while she was busy in the corral, a postal worker arrived with a small, heavy package. Inside was a stack of cash and a handwritten note that read, "For Bolt and you. Never stop fighting." The sender remained anonymous, but the sum was precisely what they needed to cover the remaining costs. Leona felt a wave of relief mixed with curiosity. Though there was no proof, she couldn't shake the feeling that Caspian was somehow behind this act of kindness. When Gideon learned about the unexpected gift, his brow furrowed. Caspian? What's he got to do with this? Leona met his gaze with unwavering resolve. It doesn't matter where it came from. If this gets us to Buenos Aires, we'll accept it. Bolt deserves this chance. On the morning of their departure, the entire town of San Ignacio gathered to send Leona and Bolt off with heartfelt farewells. The small bus that would take them to the airport was adorned with handmade signs and garlands of flowers crafted by the town's children. Martha pressed a lucky charm into Leona's hand, while others offered warm embraces and words of encouragement. "Carry our pride with you, dear," said Ezekiel, one of the village's most respected elders. "We're all behind you." With her heart swelling with gratitude, Leona boarded the bus, leading Bolt carefully into a specially prepared trailer. As the bus pulled away, tears blurred her vision, rolling freely down her cheeks. This wasn't just her journey. It was a dream born of the love and faith of everyone who had stood beside her. Arriving in Buenos Aires felt like stepping into another world. The city's bustle, its gleaming lights, and the grandeur of the championship overwhelmed Leona at first. But her unbreakable bond with Bolt gave her the focus she needed to rise above the chaos and embrace the challenge ahead. She knew that while her competitors were seasoned and formidable, none shared the same backstory or unyielding spirit that had brought her this far. In the days leading up to the event, as she trained tirelessly on the elite circuits, Leona became the target of curiosity and even mockery from some riders who couldn't fathom how a young woman of humble origins had managed to stand among them. Ignoring their sneers, she remained laser-focused on every step, every movement of Bolt, her steadfast companion. The day of the competition loomed closer, and though the challenges were daunting, Leona drew strength not only from her own resolve, but also from the unwavering support of an entire community that believed in her. The sun blazed brilliantly over the sprawling grounds of the International Championship in Lexington, Kentucky. The stadium was packed to capacity, a sea of excitement buzzing from the voices of spectators. Riders and horse trainers from all over the Americas had gathered to compete in one of the continent's most prestigious equestrian events. Amid this world of opulence and tradition, Leona and Bolt stood out starkly. Where others donned pristine uniforms and rode horses bred and trained in state-of-the-art facilities, Leona wore simple, practical attire and relied on a makeshift bridle. Yet, the fire in her eyes and the unmistakable energy emanating from Bolt commanded attention. His restless movements seemed to echo a readiness to prove himself. "Feeling nervous?" asked a championship official as he finalized the last-minute registrations. Leona met his gaze with quiet confidence. "Not nervous, just ready," she replied. The crowd, a mix of wealthy patrons, breeders, and equestrian enthusiasts, murmured as they took notice of Leona. While some dismissed her as an anomaly, others, aware of her journey, looked on with quiet admiration. "There's something different about that horse," a Kentucky breeder remarked to his companion. "You can see it, he's not like the rest." The competition began with a series of preliminary rounds designed to swiftly weed out underprepared participants. To the surprise of many, Leona and Bolt advanced with ease, defying expectations at every turn. Though they lacked the polished elegance of the more sophisticated teams, their bond was undeniable. Bolt responded to Leona with a precision that suggested they moved as one, and his speed on the course was nothing short of astonishing. Among the spectators, Caspian sat in the front row, his gaze fixed on the duo. He had traveled to Lexington under the guise of attending the championship, but his true purpose was to witness Bolt's performance. As the young horse crossed the finish line in the third round with a commanding lead, Caspian felt a strange mixture of pride and frustration. The very animal he had deemed unremarkable was proving extraordinary in the hands of someone who, by his standards, had nothing. "He's incredible," Caspian murmured, masking his inner conflict with a composed tone. The final event arrived the next day, bringing with it a course designed to test not just speed, but also stamina and agility. Leona knew this would be Bolt's toughest challenge yet. He was up against horses meticulously trained for years under optimal conditions. As they waited at the starting line, she gently stroked his neck and whispered, "No matter what happens today, you'll always be a champion to me." The starting pistol cracked through the air, and Bolt bolted forward. From the outset, it was clear this would not be an easy race. The other horses quickly closed in, boxing him in and forcing him to slow. But Leona, with her sharp instincts, guided him toward an opening on the far right of the track. Bolt seized the chance, accelerating with a bold maneuver that drew gasps of astonishment from the crowd. Midway through the race, the course grew treacherous, featuring tight turns, obstacles, and stretches of uneven terrain that demanded seamless coordination between rider and horse. Here, the bond between Leona and Bolt shone brightly. While others struggled to maintain control, Bolt navigated the challenges with an almost innate grace, as if he were born to overcome them. The final curve was the most electrifying moment. Leona and Bolt surged into second place, trailing only a powerful black thoroughbred ridden by a seasoned competitor. The tension in the air was palpable as the two horses closed in on the finish line, neck and neck, each stride a testament to their training, grit, and indomitable spirit. The crowd stood on their feet, cheering and clapping wildly as the two horses raced neck and neck toward the finish line. "Come on, Bolt!" Leona shouted, leaning forward as if willing the last burst of speed herself. In a breathtaking surge, Bolt pulled ahead of the thoroughbred at the final second, crossing the finish line just a fraction ahead. The stadium erupted with applause and cheers, the name Bolt echoing through the air like a triumphant anthem. Back in the locker room after the victory, Leona was surrounded by journalists and event organizers, all eager to learn more about her and her remarkable horse. Amid the buzzing crowd, Caspian appeared in the doorway, watching her silently before stepping forward. "Leona," he said, his voice softer than she expected. She turned to him, surprised but not hostile. There was something different about Caspian now, something that seemed almost human. "I came to congratulate you. Bolt is everything I hoped he would be. And more." Leona nodded, her expression steady. "Thank you," she replied. But this wouldn't have been possible without Sable and without believing in Bolt from the very beginning. Caspian sighed, and for the first time in years, he looked vulnerable. You're right, he admitted. I made a mistake when I abandoned Sable. In doing so, I gave up on what could have been one of my greatest creations. The raw honesty in his voice caught Leona off guard. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Caspian broke the silence. I want to propose something, he said. Let's work together to give other rejected horses a second chance, like you did with Bolt. Leona studied him carefully, weighing his words. Caspian had always been a complex man, but there was something genuine about his offer. Finally, she responded, I'll agree on one condition. Respect for the animals has to be the top priority. This can't just be about business. Caspian nodded slowly, his expression serious. I've learned my lesson. You have my word. That night, as Leona and Bolt rested after the day's celebration, she reflected on everything they had accomplished. From the dusty plains of San Ignacio to the international championship, every step had tested their resilience and belief in one another. Now, with Caspian as an ally, she felt they were at the threshold of something even greater. The days following the championship were a whirlwind of change for Leona, her family, and Bolt. Their victory had made headlines far beyond San Ignacio, capturing the attention of journalists, breeders, and horse enthusiasts across the country. Yet for Leona, none of the newfound fame mattered more than returning home. When she and Bolt finally made their way back to San Ignacio, the welcome was overwhelming. The small town had pulled out all the stops, with banners, flowers, and signs reading, Welcome Home Champion, and Thank You, Bolt. Neighbors gathered in the town square to greet her like a hero. Look at how you've made our town shine, exclaimed Martha, her eyes brimming with tears. Visibly moved, Leona held Bolt's reins as they walked through the crowd. Though the attention and applause were new to her, she understood that none of this would have been possible without the community's unwavering support. This isn't just my victory, she declared, her voice strong enough to carry over the crowd. It's ours. Bolt and I couldn't have done this without all of you. Thank you, San Ignacio. The months that followed marked the beginning of a new chapter. Leona and Caspian's partnership started modestly, but with a clear vision. Together, they founded a project on land near the town, which they named Second Chances. The mission was simple yet profound: to rescue rejected horses, rehabilitate them, and offer them new lives, whether as competitors, work animals, or simply companions. Sable was one of the first to benefit from the project. Though her leg never fully healed, she lived out her final years, surrounded by care and love. Once abandoned in the wilderness, the mare now stood as a symbol of resilience and hope, drawing visitors from far and wide to the ranch. As for Bolt, he became a living legend. Her story inspired people from all walks of life, far beyond the borders of her small world. Even when Leona made the heartfelt decision to retire Bolt from competitions to protect him, his legacy remained an enduring symbol of resilience. At the heart of the project, a stunning bronze statue depicting Bolt and Sable was unveiled, a tribute to everything they had conquered together. This statue isn't just for us, Leona said with tear-filled eyes during the unveiling. It's for anyone who's ever been cast aside. So they'll remember there's always a second chance. The transformation didn't stop at San Ignacio. Bolt's story resonated far and wide, reaching corners of the world Leona could never have anticipated. Through social media, documentaries, and articles in renowned magazines, their message of hope traveled across the globe. Donations poured in from countries far and wide, enabling the project to expand its reach even further. Despite the growing recognition and the influx of new opportunities, Leona stayed grounded, deeply connected to her roots. She continued to live in San Ignacio with her family, dedicating herself daily to caring for rescued horses and teaching others the power of patience and love in working with animals. Willa, now a little older, had started learning how to care for the animals, while Gideon took charge of the heavier work on the ranch. Caspian, too, had undergone a transformation. While he remained a businessman at heart, his priorities had shifted. He had learned to appreciate the once overlooked connection between humans and animals. Caspian now worked alongside Leona, embracing her ideals and gaining a new perspective on life. "I never imagined I could learn so much from someone so young," Caspian admitted one serene afternoon as they watched Bolt gallop freely across the fields. "And I never thought I'd trust someone like you," Leona replied with a warm smile. Their laughter echoed, a testament to how their once divergent paths had converged into a shared purpose. As the years rolled on, Bolt's legacy only grew stronger. The tale of the abandoned mare, the extraordinary foal, and the determined young woman who refused to give up became a beacon of hope for countless people. Children visiting the ranch listened with awe to stories of Sable and Bolt, while adults found inspiration in Leona's unwavering perseverance. When the day finally came for Sable to pass on, she was honored with a heartfelt ceremony at the ranch. In her memory, Leona planted a tree, a mesquite that over time grew tall and lush, mirroring the indomitable spirit of the beloved mare. Leona knew her mission was far from over. Every rescued horse, every life changed, stood as a testament to the power of love and determination to overcome any obstacle. "Let's keep moving forward, Bolt," she whispered one day, gently stroking his muzzle. "There's still so much left to do." The once barren desert where Sable had been abandoned now flourished with new possibilities. At the heart of it all was Bolt, a horse who had not only won races, but also the hearts of everyone touched by his incredible journey. Wow, what a journey, right? While this story isn't based on real events, it's packed with so many powerful lessons that feel deeply personal and universal. The tale of Leona, Sable, and Bolt isn't just about survival. It's about love, resilience, and believing in the impossible. It reminds us that even when the odds are stacked against us, hope and determination can carry us through the hardest challenges. Leona's unwavering spirit teaches us the value of standing up for what matters, even when it's not the easiest path. Her bond with Bolt, a horse that so many had given up on, is a beautiful reminder that second chances can transform lives, not just for animals, but for people too. And let's not forget the power of community. San Ignacio shows us what can happen when people come together with kindness and support. So, what did you think? Did this story inspire you, or maybe remind you of a time you faced a challenge and came out stronger? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going because stories like this can spark some truly meaningful discussions. And hey, don't forget to like and subscribe for more inspiring content. See you next time.